So what we're going to do now is I'm going to make some short comments about the past week. And I know a number of you had questions about what's going on in the Finance Committee, what's going to happen with the economic package, the $2,000 checks and unemployment insurance and COVID and the like. So after we're done, we'll take questions on both subjects. And by way of starting, I'd like to just put it this way. I flew home from DC last night. I got to bed around 12:30 Oregon time, 3:30 back east. So it was a long night. I've got 8 virtual town hall meetings coming up this week, and I would turn around on a dime if that was what was necessary to remove Donald Trump from the White House. My view is Donald Trump is a clear and present danger. He has created his own American carnage. And my view is what happened this week is really the culmination of Donald Trump spending 4 years fanning the flames of fanaticism. And he is responsible for this week's domestic terrorist attack on the people's capital, and he ought to be held to account. Now, I laid out on the floor of the Senate that this was domestic terrorism. And I want people to understand that, because I've heard a lot of people talk about thugs and hooligans and that sort of thing. This was a domestic terrorist attack, and it's the classic definition. People trying to use intimidation to advance a political goal, which was clearly to keep the certification process so that Joe Biden would be certified as president from going forward. Now, every president has enormous powers in the presidential arsenal. And Donald Trump just proved once again that he is incapable of exercising those powers with the best interests of the American people. Donald Trump's only interest is his self-interest. And he has demonstrated he'll stop at nothing to advance those self-interests. And every single day, Donald Trump is in office, in my view, is a threat to kind of values that are sacred to this country and to Oregon. I also want to talk for a moment, because some of you have asked why I've supported using the 25th Amendment in this situation. The 25th Amendment was passed in 1965. 3/4 of the states ratified it in 1967. And what was particularly noteworthy is one of the amendment's authors, who was a Republican from Virginia, spelled out that it applied if a president was, and I quote here, unable or unwilling to make a rational decision. My view is that's what we're dealing with here. Let's throw it open to questions at this point, and I'll respond to what's on your mind.
Aaron Nilsson has a question.
Good morning, Senator Wyden. Thank you for joining us and doing this for us.
Good. Thank you for being on the discussion.
I had one question for you right now is, how would you compare what happened last year with some of these BLM protests across the states to what has recently happened in D.C.? How would you feel about that?
I think the president-elect summed it up, and that is that there certainly is a different standard with respect to those protesters, the domestic terrorists, and what Black Lives Matter and Black Americans have been up against. I think Damian Lillard mentioned it pretty specifically. It really feels like there are two Americas. Now, the basic proposition, in my view, has got to be that violence is always unacceptable, period, full stop. Now, I'd also like to mention that to their great credit, Black Oregonians have made it very clear that violence is unacceptable in terms of advancing their causes to root out racial injustice. And many of them have made the point again and again that violence hurts the cause of Black Lives Matter. And as the new chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, we've got serious racial injustice issues. You look, for example, at the white suburbs where affluent people are, tremendous array of incredibly impressive healthcare services. For Black Americans, very often they're faced with a healthcare desert where it's very hard to get services. The maternal mortality rate, for example, is much higher for Black Americans than it is for whites. So I think this is another example, as Damian Lillard was talking about, and I think speaking for many Black Oregonians of there being two Americas.
Thank you.
Yeah, the next question is from Rachel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, great. I just wanted to know, what about consequences for other members of Congress who went along with President Trump in this, attempt to sort of overturn the election? And what kind of conversations have you been having about that?
First of all, as you know, I think you all reported on it. I said yesterday that I think Senator Hawley and Senator Cruz should resign. And I believe that the picture of Senator Hawley with his fist in the air, inflaming the domestic terrorists to advance on the Capitol, is going to go down in history as an infamous symbol of one of the worst days in our history. I think there need to be consequences. I believe the two should resign. If they don't, it's my intention to work with my Senate colleagues because there need to be consequences. Some of my colleagues, Senator Kaine, a thoughtful senator from Virginia, has recommended censure. I think other senators have ideas. Rachel, for me, the bottom line is there must be consequences.
Okay, I just have another question about, the transfer of power. With the inauguration coming up, it looks like there's still the possibility of more violence happening at the Capitol and at state capitals, and just what you're anticipating, how you think this can be a peaceful transition.
Certainly, the president-elect spoke for a lot of us when he said, well, I agree with Donald Trump on something. It's not coming to the inauguration. My view is, and flying home last night, I had a chance to talk to folks on the plane. The country understands that there is a fundamental difference between peaceful protest and inciting violence and domestic terrorism. And what we saw in the Capitol on Wednesday was way over the line. It was about domestic terrorism. It was about fomenting violence and trying to intimidate, as I described in terms of the classic textbook definition of domestic terrorism, trying to intimidate in order to achieve a political goal. And based on everything that I'm picking up, I think Americans of a wide variety of approaches to talking about issues, say, in front of the Senate Finance Committee, where I'll be the chair. People are going to have very significant differences, but they don't want them to be followed up by violent activity that puts Americans who just want the chance to engage in peaceful and valid dialogue at risk. I've had 970 town hall meetings in the time I've been honored to serve Oregon as our senator. I'm going to have these virtual town meetings this week, but I can't wait to the day when we'll be able to go back and just have an in-person discussion where folks can actually look at each other and get a sense of people's actual feelings and you don't even have the gap in time between when people ask the question and when you get the response. So I think we're going to see an outpouring from the millions of Americans who watched with horror what happened on Wednesday. And I think they've really got their radar up for people who are trying to use them. And that was, and I'll mention that as my last point, Rachel. I said on the floor of the Senate on Wednesday, this was a fake debate. It was a bogus debate because Donald Trump, Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, and others tried to create this image, not only that there was fraud in the election, which Donald Trump's own attorney general said was not the case, but they tried to create the impression that the Senate had the power to overthrow the election. That was false. And yet they said it again and again and again. So millions, came to believe it. Well, millions also believed that the Holocaust didn't take place. So senators like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz are giving voice to a cause and creating an impression that something is real that isn't. And I think Americans are going to be much more attuned to listening to these discussions. And if people are lying to them and trying to incite them to violent acts based on something which was really brewed in a kind of cauldron of conspiracy thinking and the like, they're just going to say no.
Next is Bridget, Senator.
Yeah.
Hi, Senator. How realistic at this point is it to actually remove Donald Trump from office? I know the 25th Amendment, it doesn't sound like that's very likely. And what are you hearing from Senate Republicans if the House moves forward with the articles of impeachment next week?
2 points. Obviously, the cabinet, we are seeing members resign. We are seeing press reports of conversations that they discussed, the 25th Amendment. I believe that members of Congress of both political parties do believe, as I said earlier, every day Donald Trump is in office is a threat to the well-being of this country now. Is he going to send us off into some kind of foreign entanglement? Is he going to make dangerous appointments? Is he going to abuse the pardon power? So I clearly would like to see the most expeditious route taken, which is the 25th Amendment. That's why I wanted people to actually hear the history, because when you hear the history of a Republican who authored the amendment say that it applies if a president is unable or unwilling to make a rational decision, that is what we're dealing with here, Bridget. And my hope is that the 25th Amendment route will be pursued. Certainly in the House, they're going forward with their impeachment process. And also, I said in my remarks on the Senate floor on Wednesday, I believe that every single senator, every Democrat, every Republican, regardless of your political views, again, say on these issues before the Finance Committee, has an obligation now to watchdog Donald Trump every single day and do everything in our power, whether it's with our committees, with its laws, alerting those of you in the press to additional abuses. Every senator has an obligation to be a watchdog now against further kinds of abuses.
So super quickly, are you hearing movement from Republican senators
Yes,
on that?
I believe that Republicans in the Congress, and we saw it even on Wednesday. There were senators who, like I think 5 or 6, who actually changed their mind within like 3 hours in terms of supporting these bogus requests to overturn elections that they had been in favor of. Bridget, that's a big deal. You know, when senators change their mind on a position, they really have a strong reason for doing it. So we began to see it on Wednesday night. We saw it after Wednesday. A number of Trump cabinet officials, were talking about it. Several of them resigned. So I think we do see real movement among Republicans to protect the country. Donald Trump showed that he would be willing to put our country at risk in order to advance his interests. I'm sure some of you saw the newspaper headlines that were printed around the world about what was going on Wednesday. The whole world was horrified about what happened.
Senator
Thank you.
Next, and then the Orgon will have the last question.
Okay.
Hey, thanks, Senator Wyden. Mitch McConnell has said that impeachment proceedings probably wouldn't continue in the Senate until, just before or after the inauguration. So how much of this impeachment effort, sort of putting aside the 25th Amendment for a second, but how much of this impeachment effort is about earnestly trying to remove President Trump from office versus sending a message about this kind of behavior?
Important question. I believe that both issues are at the center of the discussion. As I said, I believe Donald Trump is a threat every single day when he is at 1600 Pennsylvania, period, full stop. I also believe that it is hugely important to send a message that this country will never accept this happening again, that this is part of making it clear that the country understands the enormity of the damage that was done by domestic terrorists, and that Donald Trump, who incited this and didn't do it just once, he did it again and again. If you look at his statements, come to Washington, it's going to be wild. If you look at his speech, my own sense is, even when he went before the cameras, he told all those people, we love you, and basically showed that the reason he was speaking was because a bunch of lawyers told him that he was in incredibly hot water legally, and it was like he was just pushed to the microphone and forced to talk as a part of his legal defense. So I think both issues are part of what is driving the importance and the immediacy of this issue.
Senator Jamie's going to have the last question. The Orgon.
Jamie.
I'm sorry, that was me asking that last question.
Oh, I didn't recognize his face.
Sorry, that was my fault. Sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more appropriate probably to ask the Oregon House members, but I talked to them. They were in meetings apparently throughout the last couple of days. They were on that flight as well. So I think the House leadership is making it very clear that they are just doing everything they can to clear out the procedural hurdles in order to act on this quickly. And as far as I can tell, appropriate question for the House members. They have been pretty much working on this around the clock. I saw judiciary members involved in various aspects of the articles, and I can just tell you from observing what's going on in the House, they are pulling out all the stops at this point to get it front and center.
And actually, Senator, one final question from Bridget. She had one follow-up.
Oh, good. Bridget.
I have one more. Really quickly, can you take us to the moment when you found out the Capitol was under attack? I mean, tell us how you were feeling in that moment when you had to be ushered out. Obviously, lots of chaos, but how were you feeling? And now how are you doing going through something so traumatic like that?
Well, Bridget, it's great to be home. The first thing that happened was, the neighbors all brought cookies. I guess that's the classic Oregon way is, you're thinking about somebody and delicious cookies arrive. Here's how I felt. I'm a first-generation Jewish kid. My parents fled the Nazis in the 30s. Not all my family got out. My Uncle Max, my great Uncle Max, was one of the last to gas in Auschwitz, last to be gassed in Auschwitz. My family loves America, loves what America stands for. My dad basically talked his way into the army because he wanted to drop propaganda pamphlets on Hitler. One of the most patriotic people you can imagine. I mean, his DNA, when he got to come to this country, I think became red, white, and blue when he landed here. And so, of course, we're used to, as members of Congress, and it's been such an honor to represent Oregon. I love doing the town meetings. We're used to situations coming up where people are concerned about safety and the like. This was clearly different. And it's why I was the first on the floor of the Senate, essentially, to talk about what was really at stake and have gone to considerable lengths to make sure that when people say, well, they were thugs or hooligans or something like that, these were domestic terrorists. And as I looked around and I saw officers with machine guns on the floor of the United States Senate, my first thought, because they were going to move us and we were taken quickly to another place. I'm on the Intelligence Committee. I know when you're not supposed to get into those details. But I kept asking myself, how can this be happening? This is not Donald Trump taking a position on a piece of legislation and I would disagree or something. That's what the American system of government's all about. People disagree all the time. But this was the culmination to me of 4 years of Donald Trump fanning the flames of fanaticism. And that really was just in the pit of my stomach. I felt that the law enforcement people, and they kept moving us, and we were dealing with where we were going to be and sheltering, in place and that kind of thing. They're wonderful people, and I was convinced that at some point they'd move us. But what was first and foremost in my mind was this pit in my stomach, thinking about my dad, thinking about how special this country is. How could this happen here? And how determined I am to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Thank you.
Nope, nobody wants to ask about what we're going to do on the Senate Finance Committee? Okay.
Another time.
Another time. Thanks, everybody.